I'm David Van Slyke, and I have the privilege to serve as the Dean of the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. It's my pleasure and honor to welcome you this afternoon. Before we begin our event, we would like to acknowledge with respect the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous people on whose ancestral lands Syracuse University now stands. We also acknowledge and support those struggling against institutional racism and structural violence, and who are working toward a better future today. And finally, we thank all those serving in essential positions of responsibility, and all those that have childcare and family responsibilities for whom this pandemic has created numerous and unforeseen challenges. Over 1,100 alumni and friends have registered for this year's virtual Orange Central celebration. We hope you're enjoying this year's lineup of programs, both those happening live, as well as the many recorded options. And we are especially happy to have you here this afternoon for our Maxwell conversation. We're recording this event, so for those of you who could not join us, so that those who could not join us can watch the program at a later time. And if you don't want your image recorded, feel free to disable your video camera by clicking on the icon in the lower left corner of your screen. We're also pleased to provide closed captioning during our program. So if you would like to view closed captions, click the CC button in the toolbar. Before we begin, there are positive and exciting things happening at the Maxwell School. First, our students, staff, and faculty have adapted to the challenges of the pandemic and shown one another grace, treated each other with compassion, and shown humility. Our students and faculty are engaged in learning and research that touches so many elements of how COVID affects individuals, communities, and our nation. One of the great assets of the Maxwell School is our disciplinary and interdisciplinary expertise in the social sciences, along with a deep commitment to public and international affairs and engaged citizenship by our Maxwell community. Our work and those doing it are finding their perspectives are being actively sought after by decision and policymakers at every level of government, as well as in the nonprofit and private sectors. Before we begin today, I'd like to share just an additional few highlights about the school. This fall, the Maxwell School recruited its second class of directly admitted undergraduates. And while this year was an unusual one to recruit and enroll students, we continue to see strong demand from students for our majors and courses and the relevance of a Maxwell education and the many different forms of experiential learning that are available. We were also able to recruit a significant number of students, from evacuated Peace Corps volunteers and Fulbright scholars to our different graduate professional programs, aligning our top programs with their commitment to public service. And since the spring of 2020, we have seen an increase of as much as 80% in the inquiries received for our online executive MPA program over the same period last year. These students are experienced, diverse, and have a deep commitment to lead for the public good. The program for the advancement of research on conflict and collaboration now offers Maxwell's first standalone graduate certificate program online. The program is a certificate of advanced study in conflict and collaboration. You know, the establishment of the Maxwell School only 4 years after passage of the 19th Amendment is impressive because of our commitment to citizenship. But women have not always been recognized, appreciated, or afforded the opportunities of leadership. We're working hard to address that. And just a few examples of that is in our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Since the fall of 2016, Maxwell has hired 42 tenured, tenure track, and teaching professors, of which 41% identify as faculty of color and 45% as female. Maxwell women lead our programs in citizenship and civic engagement, history, political science, and sociology, as well as leading 6 of our 11 research centers. We've hired a Maxwell Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion that comes from the faculty, Professor Gladys McCormick, who has worked closely with me and the Dean's leadership team to develop a strategic plan for the school that reflects our commitment to the goals, activities, and systems to institutionalize diversity, equity, and inclusion over the long term. This plan is now being socialized and reviewed with input from many different stakeholder groups in the school. And we have increased and diversified the Maxwell Advisory Board from 24 members in 2016, of which 5 were women and 1 identified as a person of color, to now 39 members, of which 16 are women and 11 identify as individuals of color. We still have a long way to go, but we are making positive progress. And now I'm delighted to introduce my colleague and friend, Carol Faulkner, Professor of History and Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at the Maxwell School. Professor Faulkner studies the history of the 19th century United States, with a particular focus on women, gender, sexuality, and social movements. Professor Faulkner is the author of several books, including her most recent, titled Unfaithful: Love, Adultery, and Marriage Reform in 19th Century America, which was published by the University of Pennsylvania Press. You can purchase this book or others from your favorite bookseller. Professor Faulkner teaches classes on American social protest and the history of sexuality. And as a scholar of women's history, we're delighted that Professor Faulkner will be leading our panel discussion today. Carol, over to you.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you all virtually. Thank you for coming to our event today. When we were brainstorming about a topic, what should we do for Orange Central, we batted around a number of ideas, and we finally came up with this topic because it's the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, as I'm sure many of you know. And that's the amendment in the United States that granted women the right to vote, which was not always applied in practice, but they had it in theory. And voting has been an essential marker of citizenship in the United States since its founding. And 4 years after the 19th Amendment, of course, the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs was founded. And so I was kind of interested to learn more about what the history of women at the Maxwell School was. And so this was an opportunity for me to do some learning as well, but also to try and understand the way that since the Maxwell School's founding, women have been part of its definition of citizenship and civic education as central to its mission. And so I'm really happy to be joined by 2 other great panelists who are going to help me talk about this topic and their own experiences. And we also hope that in the Q&A that you all will share your experiences as well as any questions that you might have for us. So I'm very happy to introduce Christy Anderson, who is a professor emeritus of political science. And while she was at Syracuse and still has these titles, she was the Laura J. and L. Douglas Meredith Professor for Teaching Excellence, which is the highest teaching award you can get at Syracuse University. And she was also the Chappell Family Professor of Citizenship and Democracy, which meant she led our 2 signature courses, the Max courses, Max 123, Critical Issues for the United States, and Max 132, Global Community. Among her books are New Immigrant Communities, Finding a Place in Local Politics, and After Suffrage, Women in Partisan and Electoral Politics Before the New Deal. We are also joined by Kyra Coffin, who is a graduate student in our dual MPA and MAIR program, who is set to graduate in summer 21, I believe. And while she's here, she is pursuing a certificate also in conflict and collaboration. And she has worked as a research assistant, in PARC, our program for the advancement of research on conflict and collaboration. And this year she is a research assistant to Gladys McCormick, our director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. And so we're gonna start off with some more information about ourselves and our own experiences, and then we're going to talk about some prominent women who have shaped what the Maxwell School is today. So, Christy, can you tell us a little bit more about your research and work and how it relates to the theme of women at Maxwell?
Yes, thanks, Carol. I came to Syracuse in 1984. I had been teaching for a little while at Ohio State University, and my first book, which was my dissertation, was a political science book that was historical. It was about the New Deal realignment and how the Democrats pulled together a coalition of immigrants, and I've always been interested in immigration, working class people, Black voters in some cities, to create this coalition in the 1920s and 1930s. And when I had written, when I was a graduate student, one published article about women, working women versus non-working women, and what their political participation looked like in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And somehow that article, my colleagues at Ohio State, and I have to say that I was the only woman in a department of 28 men, that made them think that I could teach women in politics, and they needed somebody to do that, because obviously there were no other women. And so I quickly kind of read more of the literature and became a specialist sort of through the back door. And since then, that was actually helpful to me. I liked teaching it, and I liked, looking at both the history and the current politics that women were involved in. And then one of the things that happened was I wrote that second book that you referred to, which talked about what happened after women got the right to vote. Did they run for office? Did they register in parties? Did they participate? What sort of impact did they have on American politics? I've written a lot of other stuff about women in politics contemporaneously. I mean, the gender gap and the extent to which women have moved into various political roles and so forth. So that's a quick summary. I can tell you more, obviously, but that'll do.
I just want to do a quick follow-up, Christy. So when you came to Syracuse, how many women were in the political science department?
2. There were, and it wasn't as large as it is now, and those 2 were Marie Provine, who then moved on to University of Arizona, and Linda Fowler, who eventually went to Dartmouth. And that was terrific for me, because they were not much, they were about my age, and they clearly were pleased to be here and happy to be here. And that was very welcoming. In Maxwell in general, and you may know the numbers, but I think I could count on 2 hands easily the women in Maxwell. There were not women faculty members. There were not very many.
Thanks so much, Christy. Kyara, can you tell us a little bit about how your research and interests connect to the theme today?
Sure. So first off, I'll just reintroduce myself. My name is Kyara Coffin. I am from the Albany area. I have my BA in International Affairs in Spanish, and then I migrated all the way to Syracuse, only 2 hours away. And this is now where I call home at the moment. So my first year, I was able to work under Professor Gerard in PARC as Carol already stated, and I got to do a lot of work in conflict studies and collaboration. And now I serve as the graduate assistant to Professor Gladys McCormick in our new diversity, equity, and inclusion role. And it has definitely been probably one of my most fulfilling roles that I've ever had so far in my short life. I've been able to directly have a voice and be a mouthpiece to the people, to the students here in Maxwell. And I consider it an honor and a privilege to be able to give a space for these voices that are definitely needed. And we continue to listen to their needs, listen to what they want. And even today we have a group meeting this afternoon coming, and I'm excited to hear what they have to say. They continue to give us their input and what they think the school can transform, what they think we should add. And it's definitely a privilege to be able to hear these opinions. I'm no stranger to being the only in a room in more than one demographic. My intersectionality definitely runs pretty wide. I am a female, I'm a Black woman in the United States. So I'm used to being a minority, but I've been in these positions that have definitely not made me feel like that. They definitely have invigorated me to hold positions that definitely jumpstart and push my passion to go farther. They've given me the space in order to speak up and speak out and value my opinion, value my identity. They value what I have to say. And I look forward to definitely being able to continue this in my career, as people have given me a voice, I not only want to give people that chance as well as I further myself into my career.
Thanks so much, Kyra. I was hoping you'd tell us a little bit about some of what you found for Gladys. As Dave mentioned, we're doing pretty well with women faculty, women students, of course. But I know you found some things that have interested you.
Yes, I don't have the complete data sets, and I definitely still need to look and compare a lot more. But as far as this year is concerned, our MPA program is one of our most diverse programs in our school, and I'm so glad to be an MPA student myself and add to that diversity. We have a long way to go, but I can definitely tell that we're at an upwards trajectory. Each program that I have listed carries almost at least a 10% people of color in each of our programs. But as far as gender is concerned, we definitely have a lot of women in our programs, and it's looking good. And I definitely have faith that with the help of all of you guys, of course, our dean, we will definitely continue to add to this diversity, both as far as gender is concerned and ethnicity and race.
Thanks so much. So I'm one of the beneficiaries of Dean Van Slyke's commitment to increasing diversity in the school, both in terms of gender in leadership, but also racial and ethnic diversity. So he appointed me as Associate Dean in 2017, and we've been working together ever since. And I believe, people can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I'm the first woman who has lasted more than a year in the Associate Dean's role in the Maxwell Dean's office itself. And so we do have the chair of the Public Administration and International Affairs Department is always an Associate Dean. So we have had women in that role, but in the Physical Dean's office as an Associate Dean, I'm trying to hold my own. So, but I was also, in case we think, everything transformed when Christy joined in the early 1990s. In 2009, when I became chair of the history department, I was the first woman ever to be elected to that role. And that doesn't seem like very long ago to me, although it might seem longer ago to some of you. So I think that is one of the things that is so interesting to be talking about women at Maxwell at this point in time when citizenship is so crucial and when the vote is so crucial that that we still have so much farther to go in all sorts of regards. So we are going to switch gears now to talk about some of the women faculty who have made an impact on Maxwell. And I'm going to turn to Christy again first, who's going to talk about Marguerite Fisher. And I believe we have a picture too.
You have a, oh yes, good. I'm thrilled that there's an actual picture of her. So Marguerite Fisher, like me, went to Smith College, and then she got a master's degree at Columbia and came to Maxwell to teach with that master's degree. Eventually got a PhD from the Maxwell School and was the first full professor, woman full professor at Maxwell. When I arrived in 1984, she was alive. She didn't die until 1990, and it's one of my greatest regrets that I never met her. But I did have older colleagues who had known her and thought very highly of her and told Maggie Fisher stories and so forth. So I've always been interested in her, and this has been a good opportunity to kind of review her career and to think about the parallels and connections and so forth. It sounds like she began teaching and writing, in American politics textbooks and teaching American politics courses and political theory courses, but her real research interests and interests that she got involved with outside of her research had to do with women and politics, women's rights, not only in the US, but all over the world. So one of the things that is wonderful, and I'd love to have somebody dig out this syllabus, is that in 1954, she designed a course called Women in American Politics, which has got to be one of the first courses that, took that title and tried to do that. I would love to see what she included. She presumably continued teaching that. She also wrote a lot about women's status in other countries. She had Fulbright fellowships. She traveled to India and spent time in Thailand, I think, and the Philippines, Vietnam, and Russia. And so did some comparative work about the status of women in these various other systems. She also there were huge connections, very important connections between her research interests and her civic engagement. She was head of the New York State Federation of Business and Professional Women's. In her 70s, after she had retired, she was a co-founder and I guess chair of the board of the Central New York chapter of NOW, the National Organization for Women, in the 1970s. She was a delegate to the Democratic Convention in 1972 after her retirement. So I just have always, I really wish for time travel. I really would love to be able to meet and talk with Maggie Fisher. But she was clearly an important part of the Maxwell School, as well as the local community and the national conversation about women during many decades.
Thanks so much, Christy. And Kyra is now going to talk about Astrid Merget. Let's see. There we go.
So I did not have the pleasure of being able to know Miss Astrid, but I feel like through reading and doing my research, I definitely felt a connection and some parallels that we can later draw on a little bit after this. But what struck me most about her was definitely her versatility, which I think can be said for a lot of people who have public administration backgrounds and passions. Public administration and what we learn here at Maxwell definitely is intersectional in nature. It can be applied and transferred to a lot of arenas, and this is exactly what she did. Not only was she in a lot of leadership positions, executive positions in academia, but she actually worked for a lot of government agencies and did research. I saw someone was repping Ohio State. She actually held positions there as well as LSU, Bernard College. She, I believe, went to Holyoke at first and then came here. But yeah, she's a graduate of Mount Holyoke, and she got her MPA from here at Syracuse. But she also is a senior advisor to the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services and a special assistant to the Assistant Secretary for Policy Development and Research at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So as you see, she definitely has a lot of transferable skills that were able to take her to a lot of different rooms. And she was able to be a pioneer in a lot of the fields that she was in order to advance a lot of important issues in public administration and in for society as a whole. And I definitely found a lot of similarities in her trajectory of how she took her career as well. And I look forward to speaking on that next.
Thanks so much. Dave, I wonder if you could say a few words about Astrid Merget and her significance for the field of public administration.
Thanks so much, Carol. Now, I feel like I have a special connection to Astrid because I'm now privileged to hold the chair that she was the very first occupant for. And long before it actually became popular, when we think about governance being across all levels of government and across all three sectors, that's the chair that Astrid held. And, within Maxwell lore, Astrid has, an enormous reputation. But as Chiara said, what's so amazing about her is she moved in a really fluid way between academia and government and the nonprofit sector. And it's amazing when you think about, so often people will say things around kind of what's conventional. You have to only follow these kinds of steps. And Astrid broke all the rules. She kept moving in and out of academia. She moved in and out of being, a faculty member and being a leader. She'd been at several, just incredible institutions. But then even after she had been provost at LSU, and then stepping down from that position, she continued to be in a national spotlight, not only her work with the National Academy of Public Administration, but especially with the National Academy of Sciences. And so to me, Astrid had, this kind of role model for everyone approach. But I think especially for women in the field, she was always clear about, being who she was, not trying to be someone else, but recognizing that things were changing in the halls of government, perhaps before others were seeing them change. And I think that was really a testament to the fact that she had a foot in multiple worlds, but used those to reinforce both what she taught to students, but how it informed her own leadership. So I'm really proud that she's a Maxwell alum, that she's an incredible leader. And now one of the things that we have is we have an Astrid Merget Fellowship Fund to actually support faculty from main campus who teach in our programs in Washington, D.C. And this way we have a stronger academic bond between both main campus and our D.C. programming. And just appreciate, Carol, you asking me to say a word or two about her.
Thanks, Dave. So I am going to speak about Sissy Fairchild, who was a professor of history at the Maxwell School from 1977 until her retirement in 2004. And she became a full professor in, I believe it was 1985. She was promoted to full professor. And one of the things, I actually have never met Sissy because she retired before I got here in 2007, but she was kind of legendary in the history department, mostly for her love of baseball. Many of you may know we have a local farm team, the Syracuse Chiefs, and she had season tickets. I didn't even know one could have season tickets to the Syracuse Chiefs. So, so she was a dedicated baseball fan. She loved to read, but she was really, I would say, an intellectual and a pioneer in what historians call social history, which is the history of ordinary people. And she believed that ordinary people's lives mattered and shaped history, right? We usually think of presidents or kings shaping history. She believed that ordinary men and women shaped history, and particularly ordinary women. And her first book was about people who gave and received charity in 18th century France, so on the eve of the French Revolution. And her second book was about domestic servants, and it was one of the earliest studies of domestic servants, right? These people who are usually behind the scenes, but who played a crucial role in any household. And then her last book was a history of women in early modern Europe, so a broad, sweeping synthesis of early modern women's history. And she was interested in women's agency, right? She believed women had power, even though they weren't becoming lawyers or doctors. They were wives, mothers, servants, working in people's households, but she still believed that they could have an impact on the world around them. And for the purposes of this panel, one of the things that struck me as I was researching Sissy is, even though she never married and she didn't have children, she was very supportive of a work-life balance for students and faculty in the Maxwell School. And one of her graduate students actually wrote a very moving piece after her death in 2017, talking about how she had been the first female graduate student to have a child in the history department. Any other female graduate student who had gotten pregnant had apparently left the history department. And she was terrified to tell Sissy that she was pregnant. And she went to Sissy, and Sissy said to her, the graduate school stuff, that's your career, but this is your life. Right. And she made it she was very supportive of her having a child and her family until she finished her PhD. So I think now Chiara hinted at what we were going to talk about next. So I'll start with Chiara and the connections that you saw between Professor Mergett's career and your own potential trajectory and what you'd like to do.
Definitely. I think it starts off more from a personal background first. So I am an only girl of 3 boys. So just the way I was reared and the way I was rendered, I always felt like I had, by the way, I was raised by a single mother who worked very hard for me and made sure that education was the most important thing in my life. So I always felt like I had this weight on my shoulders to, really make my family proud and really do good by my mother, do good by my brothers so that I could be a leader for them. So I always soaked up everywhere that I went. I always soaked up a lot of information. I wanted to learn anything. I consider myself a lifelong learner. I don't care if I end up getting a PhD later in life. I will always consider myself a student of life, because I feel like there's always something to be learned and there's always a way to make something better and know something a little bit deeper. So I have a lot of my passions run very wide and very deep into a lot of sectors. And that's what I found most fascinating, because she not only focused on housing, she focused on financing, she was a trustee, she was a professor. She had all of these different, it was all one career, but she flowed and had a lot of fluidity with it. And I take that to heart, because I want to do the same thing. While I'm an MPA student and my career track is in public and nonprofit management, I also am an international relations student. So right there, we have another added layer to my career and my interest, where I also focus on governance and international organizations. And they really do work hand in hand together. And at first, before coming to Syracuse, I would not have known how to be able to merge my interests together, but because we are given a lot of freedom in our courses that we are able to take, it has allowed me to really nourish what I find important, what I find vital for the benefit of our society as a whole, and the people that I want to serve. And I do believe in service. I believe in public service, and I believe that there's more than one way to do it. I believe that I don't only have to run in whether it be local, state, or national, federal government, but also nonprofits. Nonprofit service is still public service. International organizations is still public service. Being a professor is a public service. And I do find myself coming back to academia at some point, maybe not to teach, but definitely in another role. One of the most impactful jobs that I've ever had to date, I'm only 23, but one of the most impactful jobs that I've had was actually being a pre-college RA. And at first, when I signed up for the job, I was only 18 years old. And I thought that I was only going to, just look out for the safety of students. That's all I thought that the job would require, make sure that students stayed safe, and that would be it. But it was actually a lot more than that. And that triggered my participation in a lot of academia and a lot of events here at this institution, back home at Skidmore, because they look to you when they're much younger than you, and they look to you to be a leader. They look to you for inspiration and motivation. And I think that that end of high school, beginning of college is such a pivotal time in a young person's life, because even for me, that's where a lot of my dreams were actually able to be fostered and come true. No one in my family has ever been out of this country. No one in my family owns a passport. And by going to college, I was actually afforded a lot of those opportunities to become the first. And Astrid was also a pioneer in her career here at Syracuse, within the governmental agencies that she worked in. She was able to be the first. She was able to inspire other women. And that's really what I hope to do with my own life. I really hope to inspire other women. I hope to inspire people that look like me and people that come from backgrounds where they may not have had all of the money. They may not have had all of the best education at all the times, but it doesn't matter. As long as you have representation and you see someone that identifies as you, see someone that puts something down inside of you, you can really inspire them to reach their own dreams that they have inside. And I hope to do the same.
Thanks, Kara. Christy, what about you? Did you find any new intersections between your work and Maggie Fisher's that you didn't realize before?
Well, first, I just have to say that I really appreciate your bringing Kiera to this conversation. Thank you, Kiera, for kind of articulating what we hope that Maxwell does for people, and in such a good, interesting way. I really look forward to seeing what happens to you in the future. I don't think I found really new connections, but I appreciated more the connections that I sort of knew were there between what I've been interested in and what I've done and Marguerite Fisher. As I said, we both graduated from Smith College, so we both have the same good experience, supportive, good experience, I suspect, of a high quality women's education. Smith is one of the relatively few women's colleges that in the 70s, when many of them went co-ed, decided to not do that. And since then has done very well, including it's the only women's college in the United States that has an engineering program, which has been very successful. And so I'm a Smith fan for sure. And I would love to talk to Maggie Fisher about her experience there in the 20s. We obviously both taught at Maxwell and taught courses on women in politics. One of the things that I really didn't know until I reread some of the stuff about Marguerite Fisher was how engaged she was in civic and political life. And as it happens, I have been similarly engaged. I've been an elected official for, I think, 15, 16 years. I'm a member of the town board in my little town of Cazenovia, and I've been active in Democratic Party politics at the town and county and state level, and have gotten other women to run for office, which is something I'm proud of. I really think that, again, I regret never having met Marguerite Fisher. The other thing I thought about, and I hadn't thought about this until I sat down to do this, is that, I mean, my sense has always been, I said when I arrived in 1984, there were very few women in the Maxwell, and it was very much it was a very different institution in the sense that there were, if you looked at it just in terms of role or function and gender, there was a very small dean's office, a dean, a couple of employee helpers, Gloria Katz, for example, whom many people may remember. Then there were a whole bunch of male faculty members in all the departments. And then there were lots of female staff. Departments had lots of secretaries because, of course, you didn't type your own things. You didn't make copies of your own things. You had a lot of support staff for that. So it was, and there were just a few women professors. I mean, it's so different now just in the way, so there, partly because it's not all just faculty and secretaries. There are all kinds of other roles that people are playing, from the IT people to the research institutes to, non-teaching positions. And there are many more women filling all of those roles. So that's been a huge change. But I have always, from the start, thought that Maxwell was, or felt to me like a pretty comfortable place for a female faculty member. And as I said, Linda Fowler and Marie Provine, who were my colleagues and friends, felt that way too, pretty much. And I also thought back to when I came here for an interview, and one of the people who interviewed me was the then department chair of political science, Tom Patterson, who later went to Harvard and is still there. And it surprised me a lot that when I think maybe the first time I was in his office being interviewed for the job, he was, talking to me, making phone calls. He had his fairly newborn baby in his office in a little, baby seat. And I thought, wow, that's something I haven't seen, a male faculty member taking care of a baby while his wife was a doctor. And yeah, they were clearly sharing that. And that made me feel reasonably good. The other thing I would pull out of my past with regard to Maxwell and women faculty, in 1987, so 3 years after I arrived, I had a baby, my youngest child. And at that point, there was nothing like parental leave, nothing, no, you maybe, yeah, there just wasn't. So I just sort of didn't tell people that I was pregnant in the fall. And then in the spring, I was scheduled to have a baby right about spring break, which didn't quite work out as I expected. He was late. So I had to go back to teaching 10 days after I gave birth, which was possible because of all my colleagues who rallied around, including Tom Patterson and Bob McClure and other people who stepped in and taught my classes for those couple of weeks when I was trying to recover. And after that, I brought that child in with me to work often in a little crib and so on. My ex-husband was teaching here too, and he was helpful in that regard. So it worked. There was a good community supportive of that, of my, kind of issues at that point. So I've always wondered whether, and this was accentuated by thinking about Marguerite Fisher, if she was not partly responsible for, helping Maxwell become a woman-friendly environment for the people who work here. And I'm pleased to say right now that the political science department has, as I said, when I came, there were 3 women. Now there are 14 women out of 33. So 42% of the faculty members in political science at this moment are women. And we are now on our 3rd female department chair. So that's a long kind of winding connection with Maggie Fisher.
Yeah, that's excellent, Christy. I mean, I was thinking as you and Kiara were talking that all of these women went to women's colleges.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
that
I
sort
had
of
forgotten
shows,
about Astrid. Yeah, going to Mount
yeah,
Pleasant.
shows the shift in higher education
Yeah.
over the course of the 20th century, where women's colleges provided
Right.
this foundation and
Yep.
space for women to make inroads into higher education that eventually extended to um, other colleges and universities. And people will be glad to know that Syracuse University does have a parental leave policy now. So
I know.
no one is going back into the classroom 10 days after giving birth, we hope.
Nope.
So I just wanted to say a couple more things about Sissy, because when I first was assigned Sissy by Jess, I was like, oh, I won't have anything in common with her because she's a French historian, right? And I don't like, I don't mind baseball, but I don't love it. So, but then I realized that she was also interested in some of the same problems that I'm interested in,
Yeah.
which are one of which is the role of sex in history and how important sex is to ordinary people's lives, and is really this topic that is very hard to uncover in the past. And some of her groundbreaking research was on illegitimacy rates in 18th century France. And so I was quite surprised by, I recognized that. And I also think right now during the pandemic, I think ordinary people feel like they are shaping history and experiencing history in a way that they don't normally do.
Yeah.
Because this is sort of accelerated, change has been accelerated. But just the way that we now feel like we're experiencing and taking part in history, depending on our actions, that was always the case with whatever we do, right? Just living our lives, we are making an impact on history. And it made me, history has kind of moved away from social history right now, and we've even taken a biographical turn. So and focusing on people whose lives deserve biographical treatment and can withstand them. But it made me think that all the history that we study today could not have been done without people like Sissy and the people who were doing the very, very difficult social history research of really trying to uncover ordinary people's lives. So I think it's time for the Q&A. And so we hope you will share your stories and questions.
So everyone, you can either post your question in the chat or you can use the raise hand function in the participants section.
Which is down at the bottom.
Looks like we have Sue Perry Brown. Sue, why don't you unmute yourself? And then if you can identify which of our panelists you think would be good for your question, that'd be great.
Well, I'm a graduate of Syracuse, obviously, or I wouldn't be here today. I graduated in 1960, and I'm directing this, I think, to Carol and Christy. And Christy would be more of a contemporary for the changes that I personally have been a part of. My major at SU was in broadcasting. And I was also elected. We had two separate student governments at that time. Until '62, there was a men's student government and a women's student government. And they'd been in that form for a long, long time. And I was one of the last of the presidents because we soon put together a joint student legislature. Anyway, as the president of women's student government, I had a lot of ambition about what I could do, and that was very restricted. But I was also, as a broadcasting major, very active at WAER and wanted to learn everything I could about being on the air and how to run stations and all of that, and put together some internships for myself at the NBC station. The faculty advisor for WAER came in to see me at the end of my junior year, and he said, forget about doing news and documentaries. Women will never be deemed credible by this industry, and so you will have to settle for something less. And I can be stubborn. And he made sure that I didn't do any more news programs at WER. But I was hired after I graduated by ASU, or by the NBC station. They knew of me through my work at ASU. And all they would let me do was women's programming. And after a while, it got really boring because it was so minor. And when I finally convinced the president of the company to let me do a documentary, it went over very well. It was all about a new prenatal service that had just opened up, beautiful new place at Krause Hospital. And I interviewed the doctors and the parents and all kinds of people. And the president of the station was furious afterwards. He said, "You'll never do that again. It's too expensive." And I quit about 3 years later. I just walked away, but I wasn't ready to give up. And I won't go into all the details, but eventually I had a series of careers and certifications, and certifications that were, instead of masters, because they weren't master's programs yet. So I have a certification in human service behavior, and I have a certification in human sexuality and counseling. And what I hear you saying, Carol, I deeply support, because I was working in that field in the 70s and 80s, and we were coping with high rates of teen pregnancy, and we were also coping with AIDS. And my last 5 years of my career, I was the public affairs director at Planned Parenthood in Syracuse. And I was the one who dealt with the press and the politicians. And I couldn't have had a better journey, but it was rough along the way. And when I think back to hearing somebody say to me, "You're not credible because you're a woman," forget it. That was a dare. And I thank you. I've not been aware of your work, and I commend you. There's so many women out there that need to hear what you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing your story. That's really an amazing trajectory and an amazing story. Yeah, I could not agree more, of course. So we had a comment about Catherine Bertini in the chat. Norma asked if people wanted to talk about their most inspiring faculty members, and Judith O'Rourke says, "Catherine Bertini was one of my favorite faculty members during my MPA part-time. I think that is because she is so passionate about educating women all over the world." And I think you'll be happy to know that Catherine Bertini is back with us this semester, teaching in the MPA program and continuing to inspire.
To speak on the note of the faculty that have inspired us, or anybody who has inspired us, I also want to, well, my first faculty that I'll say has been right off as soon as I got here. I was so inspired by Professor McCormick, who is now the director of diversity, equity, inclusion, of course, and her work that she does in contemporary Mexico, and just how diverse her skill set is and where it has taken her. But I also have noticed that I am really grateful and thankful for not just faculty, but the staff here. I must say that I learn a lot, not just in the classroom, but just from the talks that I have with staff in the hallway, people who have shown a personal interest in my growth and my interest. And I will name one, Associate Director Josh in the Office of MPA or PAIA. He has been really instrumental in just being an advisor, not just academically, but just showing me my options for careers and my professional growth. It definitely has meant a lot for me.
May I, excuse me, may I speak?
Yes, definitely.
I also graduated in 1960 after doing my undergraduate work in 2 years and 9 months, all 4 years in 2 years and 9 months. I didn't get involved with the radio, but I was in J school when we went to school in the woman's old gym before Newhouse. And Ted Koppel was in many of my classes, and it looks like Sue was also there then, since we graduated the same year. It's 60 years ago. So the school has certainly changed in all that time. And I'm glad to see that so many women are participating and teaching and in very serious roles now.
Thank you.
Great.
Ellen. So we have a former student of Christie's who posted in the chat, Katie Walpole, who graduated in 2012. Said, I'm a former student of Christie's. I first met her when I took the Max 123 class my freshman year, assisted her with some freshmen my sophomore year with advising, and she was my honors capstone advisor for my junior and senior year.
And Katie, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Christy.
Hi. And we should note, I would note that Katie now has a very responsible job in Nevada, right?
Yep. I work as a senior management analyst
For the county. Yeah.
for the Clark County Commission in Las Vegas.
Right. She has risen in the Clark County bureaucracy and I think is having a great time out there. I see her on Facebook and I'm really glad that you're here, Katie.
To be here. Thank you, guys.
Well, while others are waiting to think about their response, Jess Murray said that a question came in to her and she was wondering, or the questioner was wondering, for Carol and I, how has the school changed since we came to Maxwell? And Carol, maybe you'd like to go first and then I'll follow up after you.
That might be a question I need to think about a little bit. I'm not really sure how it's changed too much. I think one of the things that changes, and this is true anywhere, is the people change, and so you see kind of generations, and I think our conversation today gives a little bit of an indication of that, right? That departments and programs, as well as the school, kind of ebb and flow as people retire or move on, and that changes the culture. And we've had a great opportunity, I'd say, since I got to Maxwell in 2007 to do a lot of hiring. And I think that all the new faculty, and they're not so new anymore, who have come have made a huge impact on the school and are, incredible teachers and incredible researchers, and just re-energize the building. And so I think that's the buildings. So I think that's in some ways very normal for a higher education institution, but I do think that Maxwell has become a more exciting place to work. I don't want to say exciting necessarily, but there's so much going on. And one of the great things about being in the dean's office is you get to learn about all that stuff where, as a history professor, I knew what was going on in the history department, but I didn't know all the cool things that were going on all over the school. And just learning about some of the faculty's research. We have a relatively new faculty member in sociology who works on disability and differential mortality rates for people with disabilities, and particularly the impact of COVID on people with disabilities and mortality rates. And when I heard him present his research, again, very far from what I do, it was just fascinating. So that's one of the privileges of being in the Maxwell School. But it could also be that, I'm a faculty member, so I'm a bit of a geek and a nerd. So
I'd say one thing, thanks so much for that, Carol. I'd say one thing that has changed for me is this is my 17th year at Maxwell, but my 5th year as the dean. And so when I came into the Department of Public Administration and International Affairs. And at that time, that department, even though it was in the Maxwell School, always seemed to have more of a separate identity. And I'd say that today, that department is more fully integrated with all the life and work and activities of the school itself. I'd say the other thing is that department is now teaching at the undergraduate level, something I asked about when I arrived in 2004, and the department chair at the time said to me, "We don't teach undergraduates." And it just struck me as odd. Like, what do you mean you don't teach undergraduates? They're like some of the best populations of students to be able to shape the way they think, to be able to help expose them to a range of things. And I think the third thing is I'm excited that so many faculty take seriously that their particular area of study is not just an area of study, but there are things you can do with what they focus on, what they teach, that there's greater relevance than perhaps we've ever given credit for. And I think some faculty within the building describe certain courses as the study of the study of. And I think that's become a minority position, right? That in fact, a lot of us are working on things that have direct implications to what happens domestically and what happens internationally. And for those of you on our call today, I think, one of the things I always find amazing about Maxwell, because there's no other school like it, that's a college of social sciences with a deep commitment to public and international affairs, is the fact that of our 180 faculty, a third of them work exclusively outside the United States. A third of them work primarily domestically, and then another third work both internationally and domestically. And I think what's so exciting about that is our research has portability. And it's not portability just as research for research's sake, it's how we end up informing dialogue and debate, and how we can play a role in shaping decision making, because we can be a trusted source, because we are evidence-based, we're objective, we're scholars, but we're scholars who see our work having, a greater audience over and above kind of peer-reviewed publications. And I guess the final thing is, what hasn't changed is that Maxwell has always had, as Christy and Carol spoke about, among faculty, and Kiara really got at this with Astrid, has always had a deep commitment that teaching and research were equally valued. One wasn't more valued over the other, and the fact that research could really inform your teaching and teaching could really inform your research. So I'm glad that some things have changed, but I'm really happy that other things haven't changed as well. So thanks for sending that question, whoever did, to Jess Murray.
we have a raised hand from Helen. Helen, do you want to unmute yourself?
I'm Helen Krulwich from class of 1970, the wonderful bicentennial year. Although I recognize, I suggest if you have any grandkids coming along, tell them to tell their families to choose a year to graduate other than 2070, because we too in 1970 had a lot of disruptions with Kent State and all, and we didn't really have a graduation. I don't know if it's a 50-year trend or just coincidence. But 1970 was an exciting year. I was very fortunate. I ended up in the College of Human Development, which had this marvelous female dean, Bernice Wright, who was voting for Norman Thomas, the socialist from the 20s. And I basically wrote my own program, Intro to Everything. So I ended up taking a number of courses in Maxwell, including the class with Dean Campbell, and his teaching assistant was Donna Shalala, whom we all know about, is now in Congress and has had an outstanding and cellular career. He went on to work for Carter. And I had also Michael Sawyer, who was a dean of, was chancellor of Syracuse for a while. And there were outstanding people. I took, since I was in home ec and merchandising, I took history of fashion, which ended up being history of women before there were courses called history of women. And it gave me a great insight to women throughout history. It wasn't how I had started, wasn't why I took the course. It was a requirement, and I ended up picking up a lot of good things. So I just want to say that Syracuse was a wonderful place then. It's, I know people that are in the classes today, it's a wonderful place now. I ended up going into professional school, but along the way, I was not one of those talented women that could do kids and career at the same time. So I took some time off and went to Fletcher and took some classes in nonprofit management, but went back to my career, professional career. So yes, Maxwell has a really special place in my heart over the years from then and today, and it's good to see so many people there. I have friends now whose kids went to Maxwell. They're now working in Maryland and city and county government, and it continues to be outstanding. Thanks for calling on me, and good to hear everyone's stories. Thank you.
Well, Helen, thank you so much for that. That's a great recollection, and I think that's probably a great way for us to conclude today's program. Again, I just want to thank our panelists today. I think they've done a great job and they've given us a lot of insight. I'm grateful for their participation. I want to also thank Maxwell's Information and Computing Technology team and the staff of the Maxwell Dean's Office for supporting this talk and assisting with the event. Maxwell's going to continue our virtual programming this fall, and we hope you can join us. Specifically on Friday, November 6th, the Campbell Public Affairs Institute is hosting its latest State of Democracy lecture series. The title is Post-Election Panel, What Happened and Why? What are the likely policy implications? And you can watch your emails for details about another upcoming event in collaboration with Syracuse Institute for Security Policy and Law. So Jess Murray, our great and gifted Director of Alumni Affairs, will make sure that all of you are informed of this. And then I just really want to say something that Helen just said. I wouldn't be doing my job as Dean if I didn't say to you, there are some things you can do for us. One of those is tell friends that have kids and grandkids about what a great experience you had at the Maxwell School. Second, keep in touch with us. Let us know what you're doing and what kinds of things you're involved in. Third, think about engaging with our students. Our students are always looking for mentoring guidance, internship opportunities, job opportunities. And then last, I'd really encourage you to invest in the Maxwell School. And I think that we work really hard. We try to use people's philanthropic gifts in responsible ways that really advance the work of our students and our faculty. And I think it's a testimony in some ways when we look at our faculty. A number of them have been here, a number of faculty and staff have been here for a long period of time. One of the great things I get to do is pre-COVID was to meet a lot of alumni and supporters of the school. And some of the stories they tell are very similar to Helen, talking about people like political science professor Michael Sawyer. Of course, and Christy may or may not like hearing this, I'm increasingly hearing alums talk about professors like Christy Anderson and the impact that she had both not only in the courses she taught, but the way that she made them relevant and most importantly, and as you probably saw today in her own presentation, the way she makes the work accessible. It's interesting. And the way she's living it out in her own private life, right? She's not just reading about things. She's not just researching things. She's putting these into action. And students see that and they get excited by that. So I want to thank you all today for being part of this event. And I hope you have a great weekend. Hope you tune in for more great events in this virtual Orange Central celebration. And thanks again for being strong Syracuse supporters and great Maxwell supporters. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.